Imagine standing on the deck of a pirate ship at dawn. The sea is endless, the horizon burning with sunlight, and all you hear is the groan of timbers and the crash of waves. But behind this romantic image lies a brutal truth. Most pirates weren't worrying about treasure, or even about naval battles. They were worrying about their stomachs. Because the ocean could starve you, rot your food, and kill you faster than a cannon ever could. The real question wasn't just how to fight, it was how to eat, and how to survive. And the strange, desperate recipes they created out there. On the edge of starvation, tell us more about pirates than any Hollywood story ever could. Before we dive in, if you're enjoying stories that reveal the hidden side of pirate life, take a second to subscribe. Give this video a like, and let me know in the comments where in the world and at what hour you rewatching right now. It helps more than you think, and I'd love to see where this crew is sailing in from. Now, let's go back to that deck, where the smell wasn't gunpowder or salt water, it was rotting meat, moldy bread, and barrels of beer that had gone sour weeks ago. Pirates had to eat, but the ocean was merciless. No refrigeration. No fresh vegetables after a few weeks. And every ship became a floating experiment in how long a man could live on salted meat, dried biscuits, and whatever scraps he could steal from the sea. Some recipes became legendary, others were barely edible, and many carried a hidden danger. They could save your life today, but poison your body slowly tomorrow. Take the infamous ship's biscuit. It sounds harmless, almost cozy, like a snack you dunk in tea. In reality, it was a rock-hard slab of flour and water baked until it could outlive the voyage itself. Pirates called them hardtack. At first bite, your teeth would ache, and if you dropped it, it could break your toes. But the real horror came weeks later. These biscuits were breeding grounds for weevils, tiny insects that wriggled inside every bite. Pirates learned to bang the biscuit on the table before eating, letting the little bugs crawl out. Some ate them anyway, figuring the extra protein was better than nothing. Imagine chewing that in the dead of night, knowing your only choice was to starve or swallow the crunch of insects. But the biscuits were just the beginning. Meat was worse. Pork and beef were packed into barrels, salted so heavily they could last for months. By the time a pirate pried open the lid, the meat was gray, slimy, and reeking of brine. It was technically edible, but only if you soaked it in water and boiled it until it resembled something like food. Even then, it could still kill you with food poisoning, and yet, pirates ate it anyway. Hunger doesn't wait for flavor. Then there was beer and rum. Fresh water went foul quickly, turning green with slime, crawling with bacteria. The solution? Alcohol. Ships carried barrels of weak beer, but it spoiled fast. Rum became the real treasure of the Caribbean, not just a drink, but survival. Mixed with water, it made the foul liquid somewhat safer to swallow. It dulled the taste of rot, numbed the stomach, and lifted spirits. But it also blurred judgment, turned men reckless, and sparked mutiny more often than captains liked to admit. What saved pirates, more than anything else, were the strange recipes born of desperation. Imagine a pirate pulling flying fish out of the sky. Yes, flying fish really leapt onto decks in the Caribbean and tossing them straight into a pan with hardtack crumbs. Or boiling sea turtles into stews when they were lucky enough to capture one. These were not delicacies, they were lifelines. Every dish was a gamble between survival and sickness. And here's the twist. Those recipes didn't just fill bellies. They shaped the pirate myth itself. Because when you think about it, what does a pirate's freedom mean if he starves on the open sea? Food was the hidden currency of piracy, and the cooks often ignored in stories were as vital as the men with pistols and cutlasses. Without them, the ship was doomed. One story tells of a pirate cook who saved his entire crew with nothing more than dried peas. The ship had been drifting for weeks, the meat gone, the biscuits crawling with maggots. Men were collapsing on deck, their gums bleeding from scurvy. But in the galley, this cook took a bag of dried peas, soaked them in seawater, and somehow managed to sprout them into green shoots. A miracle on the ocean. The crew gnawed those tiny sprouts, bitter and salty, but packed with vitamin C. It was enough to pull them back from the edge of death. A small, desperate recipe, but it saved lives. That's the hidden drama of pirate food. It wasn't just about hunger. It was about life and death, about finding scraps of hope in a world where the sea took everything away. Every bite carried a story, every dish a secret lesson. But there's a darker side too, one that Hollywood never shows. Because sometimes the only way to eat was to cross lines no one wants to talk about. Imagine a ship becalmed, sails limp, water barrels dry, food gone, days pass, men grow weaker. Rum runs out, eyes turn hollow, and in whispers, pirates began to speak the unthinkable. Who will be eaten first? There are stories half legend, half truth of cannibalism among stranded crews. The recipes that saved pirates weren't always made of fish and biscuits. Sometimes they were made of human flesh. That's the kind of survival the ocean demanded. And it's why every galley recipe is haunted by the shadow of desperation. But let's step back before the nightmare. Because for all the horror, there was also ingenuity. Pirates learned tricks that turned spoiled food into something almost tasty. Salt pork could be fried with rum to mask the rot. Biscuits could be crushed, soaked in alcohol, and baked into a sort of pudding. Seaweed became salad. Even sharks, feared hunters of the deep, were dragged aboard and carved into steaks. What mattered wasn't the flavor. It was the fight to stay alive long enough to taste another sunrise. And yet, one disease haunted every ship more than hunger: scurvy. Imagine your gums swelling, teeth loosening, skin bruising at the slightest touch. A pirate could wield a cutlass with one hand and still collapse, because his body was falling apart from lack of vitamin C. Lemons, limes, oranges, these were the true treasures of the sea. Captains who stocked them became heroes. Crews who lacked them withered into ghosts. That's why, in some ports, pirates would risk everything to raid a shipment of citrus. A barrel of limes was worth more than gold because it meant survival. So the galley was not just a kitchen. It was a battlefield where cooks fought against time, rot, and the ocean itself. Every recipe was a weapon, every dish a fragile victory. And in that struggle, we find the real heart of piracy, not the treasure chests or the battles, but the endless war against hunger. Now imagine this. You're a young sailor, barely 16, pressed into a pirate crew. You dream of freedom, of gold, of glory. But your first week at sea, you're handed a bowl of salted pork stew that smells like a corpse. You gag, but you eat. By the second week, you're chewing biscuits alive with insects. By the third, your gums bleed when you bite. And you realize This is the true cost of being a pirate. The food will break you before the bullets ever do. And yet, the recipes endure. They became part of pirate culture, passed down like secret codes. Not because they were delicious, but because they were proof of survival. And the more we uncover these forgotten dishes, the more we see the truth that piracy was never about glory. It was about grit. It was about finding life in the unlikeliest places. It was about eating whatever the ocean gave and living to tell the tale. But here's the question that lingers. Could we recreate these recipes today? Could we taste the desperation, the salt, the fire, the strange survival tricks of men who lived and died by the sea? Some chefs and historians have tried, and their discoveries reveal just how fragile pirate life really was. Imagine a modern kitchen filled with gleaming pans and fresh ingredients. Now erase it. Replace it with a smoky hole below deck, barely large enough to crouch in, lit by a single lantern swinging with the waves. That was the galley. The cook stood over an iron pot chained to the floor so it wouldn't spill, sweating in the suffocating heat while the ship creaked and lurched around him. He wasn't just cooking. He was gambling with the health of the crew. One bad stew, one batch of rotten meat, and half the ship could be bedridden. Pirates didn't need chefs. They needed alchemists. And what strange alchemy it was. Think of sea pie. The name sounds almost cheerful, like something you'd order at a tavern. In reality, it was a chaotic stew made of whatever scraps were left: fish bones, scraps of salted pork, biscuit crumbs, maybe a turtle egg if fortune smiled. All of it boiled together until it was barely recognizable. No recipe, no measurements, just survival in a pot. Some pirates swore it was delicious. Others gagged as they forced it down, but either way, it kept them alive. The sea pie reveals something profound. Pirates lived in a world where food was never guaranteed. Every recipe was improvisation, every meal a compromise. And when you live like that, food becomes more than just fuel. It becomes a story, a bond, a memory. A man could be halfway across the world, but if he tasted a stew that reminded him of home, for one moment he wasn't a pirate. He was a boy again, eating by a hearth. That's why some recipes mattered not because they were practical, but because they gave hope. One of the strangest pirate recipes was turtle soup. Sea turtles were a prize beyond gold. They could survive for weeks on a ship's deck without food or water, essentially becoming living barrels of fresh meat. When caught, they were turned into stews so rich and nourishing that pirates felt human again. Imagine the taste after months of rot and mold: tender flesh, savory broth, something resembling civilization. No wonder pirates hunted them relentlessly, pushing some species to the brink of extinction. A single turtle was the difference between despair and celebration. But even the greatest pirate feast carried shadows. Because food on the sea wasn't just scarce, it was political. Who ate first? Who got the best cut? In some ships, the captain dined apart with better rations. On others, food was shared equally, part of the democratic code that set pirates apart from navy men. A cook could spark a mutiny if he favored one side too much. A barrel of beef could become a weapon. A missing ration could mean a knife fight in the dark. In this way, every recipe wasn't just about survival, it was about power. There's a famous tale of Captain Blackbeard himself, who once forced his men to eat stew laced with gunpowder. Why? to make them fearless. The recipe was madness, pure theater, but it worked. His crew believed they were invincible, their stomachs burning with powder and rum. It wasn't food, it was psychology. Blackbeard knew that meals could shape not just bodies, but minds. The galley became his stage, and every dish a performance of power, but not all recipes were about intimidation. Some were about comfort. Imagine a crew finally landing on a deserted island, stumbling ashore after weeks at sea. They dig into the sand, find wild coconuts, crack them open. Sweet milk spills out, a taste of paradise. They roast crabs over open fires, eat fish caught with bare hands. For one night, they aren't starving predators on a wooden coffin. They're men again, laughing, feasting, forgetting. These moments of joy mattered more than gold, because in the end, what's the point of treasure if you never live to taste it? And yet, the sea always took its toll. Picture a man chewing on hardtack, so dry it cracks a tooth. That tooth rots, turns black, poisons the blood. Within weeks, he's dead of infection. One biscuit, one bite, can decide a man's fate. Or consider salted meat so brine that it burns the throat, destroying the stomach. Men vomit, grow weaker, collapse. Food that saved them one day killed them the next. Every recipe was a double-edged sword. Still, pirates learned tricks. They soaked meat in seawater to draw out excess salt, then fried it in whatever fat remained. They mixed grog rum, water, sometimes lime juice to mask the taste of filth and keep men hydrated. They brewed makeshift teas from seaweed or leaves found on islands, hoping it would ease scurvy. Some ships even carried spice when they could, because a pinch of pepper or nutmeg could transform the unbearable into the barely tolerable. These weren't luxuries, they were survival hacks, centuries before the word existed. But here's the haunting thought. Imagine being a pirate cook, day after day serving meals that you know are killing the crew slowly. You hear their coughs, see their gums bleed, watch them grow thinner. And yet, you keep stirring the pot because there's nothing else to serve. The galley becomes a place of guilt, a reminder that no matter how skilled you are, the ocean always wins. The recipes also shaped identity. Sailors from Africa, the Caribbean, Europe, and Asia all met on pirate ships, bringing fragments of their own food traditions. A stew might mix African spices with European, salted pork, and Caribbean fish. In this way, pirate food was the first fusion cuisine of the seas. But instead of Michelin stars, it earned scars. It was rough, improvised, often disgusting, but it was shared. And that act of sharing created bonds that gold never could. Let's not forget the darker side of these food traditions. When pirates raided ships, they weren't just after coins or jewels. They wanted food. Flour, rice, beans, barrels of beer, these were treasures too. Sometimes they left gold untouched, but emptied the pantry. Because you can't eat a coin, but you can eat a loaf of bread. And that bread might be the difference between living and becoming a skeleton on the sea. There's something strangely poetic about this. The world remembers pirates for flags, cannons, and buried treasure. But the real survival stories happened in smoky galleys, around boiling pots, over scraps of biscuit and rum. Every recipe is a ghost story, every dish a confession. It reminds us that beneath the legend, pirates were just men hungry, desperate, clinging to life one bite at a time. But here's the cliffhanger. Some recipes weren't just about survival. They were about transformation. They turned ordinary men into pirates, broke naval order into chaos, and gave birth to myths that still haunt us. And one of the strangest recipes of all, the one that blurred the line between food, ritual, and rebellion, was called pirate broth. A concoction of rum, sugar, citrus, sometimes even blood. To drink it wasn't just to survive. It was to join a brotherhood. We'll get there, but first, step into the galley again. The lantern swings, the pot bubbles, the cook stirs. Around him, the ship creaks like a living beast. And in that pot, history is brewing, not the kind written in books, but the kind tasted in salt, smoke, and desperation. Picture the storm. The ship lurches, waves crash over the deck, men cling to ropes, and down below, in the choking darkness of the galley, the cook is still at work. His pot is chained, his knife dull, his ingredients little more than scraps. But he knows the truth. When the storm ends, the crew will not ask about the sails or the damage. They will ask one question: what's for supper? Because hunger waits for no man, not even the sea itself. And in those moments of chaos, pirates discovered recipes born out of raw necessity. One of the most infamous was slush. Imagine a thick, greasy stew made from the fat scraped off salted meat. It was revolting, rancid, but full of calories. Pirates didn't waste a drop. They ate it, spread it on biscuits, even sold it back at ports where desperate merchants used it for soap or lamp oil. Slush became so valuable that the slush fund was born, the money sailors made by selling leftover grease. Next time you hear the phrase, remember, it comes from the galley of ships, from pirates scraping pots clean to survive. Another strange invention was lobscouse, a stew that mixed meat, vegetables if there were any, and crumbled biscuit to thicken it. It wasn't refined, but it filled the belly. The taste depended entirely on luck. If the meat wasn't too rotten, if someone had managed to trade for onions or carrots at the last port. If the biscuits weren't, more weevil than flour. Some crews joked that lobscouse was better the less you could identify in it, a dish of mystery, fear, and survival. But what made pirate recipes different from Navy recipes wasn't just the ingredients. It was the attitude. Navy cooks followed rules, ration lists, and strict hierarchies. Pirate cooks followed hunger. They experimented, borrowed from every culture they encountered, and made do with whatever washed up in their nets. That freedom gave pirate food a strange creativity. It wasn't elegant, but it was alive, wild, untamed, just like the men themselves. And sometimes those experiments paid off. Imagine a pirate ship pulling into a Caribbean cove, finding fruit trees heavy with mangoes or guavas. The crew rushed ashore, stuffing themselves until juice ran down their chins. The cook gathered the rest, boiled them into a sticky jam, sealed them in jars with rum. For weeks afterward, the pirates tasted sunshine, a burst of sweetness in a world of salt and rot. Those moments were rare but unforgettable. A taste of paradise in the middle of hell. But not every paradise was safe. Some pirates mistook poisonous plants for food. There are stories of crews who foraged too eagerly on islands, eating berries that left them writhing in agony. In desperation, cooks turned to trial and error, feeding a little to a dog or a prisoner before risking the crew. Imagine standing around a fire, watching someone chew a strange leaf, waiting to see if they lived. That was the reality of pirate dining. Every bite was a gamble. The most haunting gamble, though, was water. Fresh water was more precious than gold. Barrels grew slimy within days, breeding disease. Pirates mixed rum into the water to slow the rot, creating grog. But grog was a curse as much as a cure. It dulled thirst, numbed pain, but it also clouded minds, fueling drunken brawls and reckless decisions. Some captains tried to limit it. Others encouraged it, knowing a half-drunk crew was easier to control. And so grog became not just a recipe, but a weapon, a silent ruler of the seas. Still, food carried more than calories. It carried memory. Think of an African sailor turned pirate, teaching the crew to spice a stew with chili peppers he remembered from home. Think of a Frenchman adding a splash of wine to boiled fish, turning scraps into something dignified. Think of a Caribbean native showing the men how to roast plantains until sweet and smoky. These recipes became threads in a tapestry of survival. A blend of cultures that mirrored the pirate brotherhood itself, ragged, diverse, defiant, but food could also divide. A captain who took the best cuts for himself risked mutiny. A cook who favored one clique over another could spark violence. That's why many pirate codes included rules about rations, equal shares of meat, bread, and drink for every man. Equality wasn't an abstract idea. It was served in bowls. In the galley, democracy boiled as fiercely as any stew. And then there were the rituals. Some pirates believed certain foods brought luck. Eating shark meat was thought to give courage, while spilling salt was a curse. On long voyages, the first catch of flying fish was shared as a blessing. Even the act of raising a cup of grog together became sacred, sealing bonds stronger than chains. Food wasn't just survival, it was superstition, ritual, and identity. Perhaps the strangest ritual of all was the initiation feast, when a sailor chose to abandon his old life and join the brotherhood. He sometimes drank a concoction brewed from rum, sugar, citrus, and blood, his own or another's. It was foul, intoxicating, unforgettable. A recipe that marked the line between ordinary man and pirate. Drink it, and you were reborn into the lawless family of the sea. Refuse, and you remained an outsider. The galley, once again, became the crucible of transformation. But here's the thought that lingers. If food shaped pirate life so deeply, could it also shape their downfall? Many historians think so. A crew weakened by scurvy, by malnutrition, by rotting food, couldn't fight as fiercely. They grew sluggish, their spirits broken, their strength gone. Victories and defeats weren't just decided by cannons, but by kitchens. A ship with fresh supplies could outlast one with barrels of slime. The galley decided battles as surely as the quarterdeck. That truth carries a kind of poetry. Pirates are remembered for violence, for rebellion, for flags of skull and bone. But beneath it all, their lives turned on recipes crude, desperate, sometimes ingenious. A spoon, not a sword, could decide the fate of a crew. A stew, not a storm, could write history. And when we remember them, we should taste their hunger, their desperation, their fragile victories at sea. Now, imagine standing in that galley yourself. You hold a ladle, stirring a pot of salted pork and biscuit crumbs. Around you, men wait, hollow-eyed, hands trembling with hunger. You know, the food will make them gag, but it's all you have. You serve it, anyway. They eat in silence, broken only by the crunch of insects and the splash of rum. And in that silence, you realize the truth. This is piracy. Not gold, not glory. Just men fighting to live, one bitter meal at a time. And yet here's the cliffhanger, some pirate recipes didn't just save lives. They changed the world. Because when those ragged sailors returned to ports, they brought their strange dishes with them. They carried spices, techniques, ingredients that crossed oceans. Pirate food became part of global cuisine, hidden in the roots of recipes we eat today. The question is, which ones survived? Close your eyes and picture a bustling port in the Caribbean. Somewhere around the year 1718, ships creak at the docks, merchants shout prices. The air smells of tar, sweat, and spices. And among them, pirates swagger in, hungry not just for gold but for food. Because after weeks at sea, the first stop was not a brothel or a tavern, it was the market. Here, pirates tasted things they could never get at sea: fresh bread still steaming, citrus piled high in baskets, peppers burning with heat. For a few brief hours, the galley was forgotten, and pirates ate like kings. But when the anchor lifted again, they carried those flavors back on board. And sometimes, those flavors transformed into recipes that lived on far longer than the pirates themselves. One of the most fascinating legacies of pirate cuisine is how it seeped into the food culture of the Caribbean. Pirates weren't farmers. They stole, borrowed, and adapted. They learned from enslaved Africans who knew how to spice bland stews into fiery meals. They learned from indigenous peoples how to roast cassava or smoke fish to preserve it. They traded with Spanish, French, and Dutch settlers for peppers, beans, rice. And on the decks of their ships, these fragments blended into dishes that we can still recognize today. Take jerk seasoning. Long before it became famous worldwide, indigenous Caribbean people were preserving meat with a fiery mix of peppers, spices, and smoke. Pirates, always desperate for ways to make rotten pork edible, adopted the method. Imagine salted pork transformed by fire and spice, the sting of pepper burning away the taste of decay. For a crew used to swallowing worms with their biscuits, this was a revelation. That flavor smoky, hot, alive traveled with pirates and helped spread Caribbean cuisine across the seas. Or consider rice and beans, a humble dish with deep roots. For Africans forced into slavery, rice and beans were survival. For pirates, they became salvation too, filling, nutritious, far more stable than meat or bread. When pirate crews raided plantations or merchant ships, sacks of rice and beans were prized loot. In a galley pot, they became a hearty stew that could keep men strong for weeks. And long after the flags of skull and bone came down, the dish remained, a quiet reminder of lives lived and lost on the sea. But not every influence was about flavor. Some were about preservation. Smoking, salting, pickling pirates mastered them all. They knew how to pickle fish with vinegar, how to salt shark meat until it lasted months, how to ferment cabbage into a crude sauerkraut that fought scurvy. These weren't delicacies, they were weapons against death. And yet, in their own way, they became the ancestors of recipes we know today. Now, imagine being a historian uncovering an old sailor's diary. You read of fish fried with rum, biscuits boiled in turtle fat, beans stewed with pepper, and salt pork. At first, it sounds disgusting. But then you realize these are the forgotten roots of dishes still alive in kitchens around the world. Food doesn't vanish. It mutates, travels, hides in family recipes. The pirate galley may be gone, but its spirit lingers in flavors we taste without even knowing their origin. And yet, while food gave life, it also revealed death. Because on every voyage, the line between feast and famine was razor thin. A ship might feast on turtle soup one week and gnaw on leather straps the next. There are stories of men boiling their shoes for broth, softening the leather until it could be swallowed. Others chewed rope fibers, desperate to trick their stomachs. These weren't recipes, they were last prayers. And hunger didn't just torment the body, it shaped decisions. Some pirate raids were sparked not by the promise of gold, but by the smell of fresh bread on another ship. Captains steered into danger not for treasure, but for food. A single cask of fresh water could be worth more than a chest of silver. Hunger was the hidden compass of piracy, steering men toward violence, mutiny, or salvation. But food also brought moments of fragile peace. Picture a crew after a successful raid, sitting on deck at sunset. The cook brings out a pot of stew richer than anything they've eaten in months. They eat together, laugh, share grog. For a night, the ship feels like a family. These moments mattered. They healed wounds, soothed rivalries, reminded the men why they endured the endless misery of the sea. Without these shared meals, the crew might splinter. Food was glue. One of the most legendary glue meals was a simple pudding. Pirates crushed biscuits into crumbs, mixed them with sugar, rum, and maybe a bit of fruit, if fortune allowed. They boiled the mixture until it became a dense, sticky cake. To a starving crew, it was heaven. Sweetness was rare on the sea, and sugar was almost sacred. Eating that pudding wasn't just filling, it was joy, a reminder that life held sweetness even in the darkest waters. But let's not romanticize too much, because for every joyful feast, there were nights of horror. Imagine the silence of men too weak to speak, their bowls empty, their stomachs hollow. Imagine a ship drifting for days without supplies, the smell of death in the air. Food, or the lack of it, was the constant shadow. And in that shadow, pirates made choices that still shock us. Cannibalism was not myth, it happened. Survivors whispered of it, ashamed but alive. And those whispers remind us that the recipes that saved pirates' lives sometimes crossed the line of humanity itself. This is what makes pirate food so haunting. It is both ordinary and terrifying. Biscuits, beans, stews, things we eat today were once the difference between life and death. A pot of beans could save 50 men. A spoiled barrel could doom them all. Every bite was a wager against the ocean. And maybe that's why the story of pirate cuisine fascinates us. Because it strips away the romance of treasure and adventure and shows the truth, survival. Pirates weren't just rebels against kings and empires. They were rebels against hunger, against scurvy, against the ocean itself. Their weapons were knives and pistols, yes, but also pots and ladles. Their victories were not just battles won, but meals cooked against impossible odds. And here's the twist. The galley didn't just keep pirates alive, it built their legend. Imagine the tale of a crew feasting on turtle soup after weeks of famine, or Blackbeard forcing his men to eat gunpowder stew, or sailors sprouting peas in seawater to fight scurvy These stories spread, exaggerated, retold in taverns. The food became part of the myth, proof of the pirates' toughness, their madness, their refusal to die. Recipes turned into legends as powerful as cannon fire. But there's one more truth, darker still. Every pirate knew that food, like treasure, ran out. Every feast was temporary. Every stew was a borrowed victory. And so, in every meal, there was an echo of doom. Pirates lived fast, fought hard, and ate desperately, always knowing the sea would claim them in the end. Perhaps that's why they ate with such reckless joy whenever they could. Because tomorrow there might be nothing left. And that leaves us with one final question. What did these recipes really save? Did they save lives, or did they simply delay death? When you eat biscuit crawling with insects, stew made of leather, soup spiced with desperation, are you living or just refusing to die? That is the haunting paradox of the pirate galley. Think of a pirate ship at night. The battle is over, the plunder divided, the sea calm for once. A lantern glows in the galley. Inside, the cook stirs the last scraps into a pot bones, biscuit crumbs, maybe a splash of rum. The smell drifts across the deck, and the men gather. They eat, they drink, they laugh. For a brief hour, they are not hunted criminals. They are not starving animals. They are just men sharing a meal under the endless stars. And that, more than treasure, was the heart of piracy. Because when you strip away the flags and cannons, what you find is this: pirates were human beings fighting the same enemy we all face: hunger, weakness, mortality. Their recipes weren't about taste. They were about defiance. Every biscuit chewed, every stew boiled, every cup of grog raised was a way of saying, "We are still here. We are still alive." And yet, look closer, and you see how fragile that defiance was. The recipes that saved pirates' lives were never enough. Hardtack gave them weevils. Salt pork gave them sickness. Rum gave them courage, but stole their clarity. Beans and rice gave them strength, but never lasted. Even turtle soup, that rare treasure of the sea, could not stop the slow march of scurvy. Every recipe was a compromise, a patch on a sinking ship. Pirates survived, but only just. This is the hidden tragedy of their legend. We imagine them as wild and free, but their freedom was chained to the galley pot. Their rebellions, their battles, their myths, all of it depended on what the cook could serve. And when the food ran out, so did the dream. Hunger drove mutiny. Hunger forced cannibalism. Hunger broke ships apart. In the end, the real captain was not Blackbeard or Bartholomew Roberts. It was the galley. It decided who lived and who died. But here's the part that lingers: the recipes outlived the pirates. Lobscouse, the stew of scraps, became a sailor's dish in ports across Europe. Jerk seasoning spread from the Caribbean to kitchens worldwide. Rice and beans, once pirate loot, became comfort food across continents. Even grog, born of desperation, left its mark on naval tradition. Every time we taste these things, we taste a ghost of the pirate galley. The flavors of survival became the flavors of culture. And that raises a haunting thought. When you bite into something: ordinary beans simmered with salt, bread baked hard, meat spiced and smoked, maybe you're tasting history. Maybe you're tasting the ocean, the hunger, the defiance of men long gone. Recipes are time machines, carrying not just flavor, but memory. And pirate recipes, ugly and desperate as they were, remind us of what it means to cling to life when everything is against you. So what do we take from this today? Not just the curiosity of old stews or the shock of cannibal tailies. There's a lesson here, one that feels strangely modern. Because pirates lived in a world where resources were scarce, where waste was death, where improvisation meant survival. And in our own way, we live there too. Every time we repurpose leftovers, stretch ingredients, or make do with less, we echo their struggle. Every time we gather around a meal, laughing, arguing, sharing, we repeat their ritual. Food is not just survival, it is community, memory, and meaning. That is why the story of the pirate galley is not just about history, it's about us. We may not eat weevil biscuits, but we know what it feels like to hunger for food, for safety, for belonging. We may not boil turtle soup, but we know the joy of tasting something sweet after bitterness. We may not drink blood-laced rum, but we know the power of ritual, of raising a glass together and feeling part of something bigger. The pirate galley speaks across centuries, reminding us that no matter how wild the legend, survival always comes down to the same thing: what's on your plate. And perhaps the most powerful image of all is not the pirate, flag, or the cannon's roar, but the cook in his smoky galley, ladle in hand, keeping death at bay one pot at a time. He is the forgotten hero of every voyage, the silent guardian of every legend. Without him, there is no pirate life. Without him, the sea wins faster. Every recipe, every trick, every desperate experiment was his weapon. And though his name is lost, his work lives on every time we talk about pirates, every time we taste their legacy. So the next time you hear a tale of buried treasure or naval battles, remember this: the real story of pirates is written not in maps or muskets, but in meals, in biscuits crawling with insects, in salted pork boiled until gray, in beans, rice, rum, and seaweed, in turtle soup that saved a crew, in leather boiled into broth, in feasts shared after raids, in famine endured after storms. The galley was the beating heart of piracy, and its recipes were the thin line between myth and mortality. And maybe that's why these recipes still matter. Not because we want to eat them, but because they show us the raw truth behind the romance. They strip away the Hollywood glow and reveal the men behind the legend hungry. Fragile, resourceful, desperate. Human, their food tells us who they really were. So let this be the final image: a pirate ship rocking gently on the waves. The stars blaze above. The men gather on deck, bowls in hand, eating whatever scraps the cook has conjured. They laugh, they curse, they dream. And somewhere in that laughter, you hear it the truth: that the recipes didn't just save their lives, they gave them the strength to live their legend. And if that legend still lives today, maybe it's because the taste of survival never truly fades. Subscribe if you want more stories like this, because the sea still holds countless secrets, and together we'll uncover them